Okay, so today we are going to read the next chapter in the book we are using to introduce summarizing. Remember, summarizing just means putting the events from the story in order, and we are separating it by beginning, middle, and end. Okay? Alrighty, so the first thing that we're going to do is go ahead and read this chapter. We read this chapter at the beginning of the year, but we're going to read it again, and then we are going to pull out some of the events from the story. But I'm not going to give you all of the answers today, as I do want you to practice writing them out on your own. Okay? All right. Chapter 3, A Lost Button. Toad and Frog went for a long walk. They walked across a large meadow. They walked in the woods. They walked along the river. At last they went back home to Toad's house. "Oh, drat," said Toad. "Not only do my feet hurt, but I have lost one of the buttons on my jacket." "Don't worry," said Frog. "We will go back to all the places where we walked. We will soon find your button." They walked back to the large meadow. They began to look for the button in the tall grass. "Here is your button," cried Frog. "That is not my button," said Toad. "That button is black. My button was white." Toad put the black button in his pocket. A sparrow flew down. "Excuse me," said the sparrow. "Did you lose a button? I found one." "That is not my button," said Toad. "That button has 2 holes. My button had 4 holes." Toad put the button with 2 holes in his pocket. They went back to the woods and looked on the dark paths. "Here is your button," said Frog. "That is not my button," cried Toad. "That button is small. My button was big." Toad put the small button in his pocket. A raccoon came out from behind a tree. "I heard that you were looking for a button," he said. "Here is one that I just found." "That is not my button," wailed Toad. "That button is square. My button was round." Toad put the square button in his pocket. Frog and Toad went back to the river. They looked for the button in the mud. "Here is your button," said Frog. "That is not my button," shouted Toad. "That button is thin. My button was thick." Toad put the thin button in his pocket. He was very angry. He jumped up and down and screamed, "The whole world is covered with buttons, and none of them is mine." Toad ran home and slammed the door. There on the floor he saw his white 4-holed, big, round, thick button. "Oh," said Toad, "it was here all the time. What a lot of trouble I have made for Frog." Toad took all of the buttons out of his pocket. He took his sewing box down from the shelf. Toad sewed the buttons all over his jacket. The next day, Toad gave his jacket to Frog. Frog thought that it was beautiful. He put it on and jumped for joy. None of the buttons fell off. Toad had sewed them on very well. The end. All right, so now that we've read through the 3rd chapter called The Lost Button, we're going to go into our template. It says Frog and Toad are friends, Chapter 3, A Lost Button. And we're going to pick out events from the beginning middle, and end so that we can summarize the story. So, what happened in the beginning of this story? Well, we can go back and look at the pictures from the beginning of the story to try and figure it out. So remember first, Frog and Toad went walking and Toad lost his button. So we'll say, Frog and Toad went walking. Toad realized he had lost his button. In the middle, lots of animals helped Toad, right? So there's more than two events that we could use. But a sparrow tried to help Toad find his button, and a raccoon tried to help Toad find his button. So in the beginning, Frog and Toad went walking, and Toad realized he had lost his button. In the middle, a sparrow tried to help Toad find his button, and a raccoon tried to help Toad find his button. Frog also tried to help Toad find his button. In the end, Toad found his button in his house, and Toad made a new jacket for Frog. So then what you would do is go through and write your sentences. In the beginning, Frog and Toad went walking, and Toad realized he had lost his button. In the middle, a sparrow tried to help Toad find his button, period. Also, a raccoon tried to help Toad find his button, period. In the end, Toad found his button in his house, and Toad made a new jacket for Frog. Now there's a lot more details that you could add, but in the middle, you only need to add two details. So you could say Frog tried to help Toad find his button, and Sparrow tried to help him find his button, or Sparrow tried to help Toad find his button, and Raccoon tried to help Toad find his button. So you just need to add a couple of details there in the middle. But I want you to add as many details as you are able, okay? Since we are just learning how to summarize, we are not doing so many sentences, right? So as we learn to do it better and better, we are going to add more and more detail, all right? Good luck with today's beginning, middle, end, and we will go over it during our live session.